Excellent.
Owen, Alan, welcome. And it looks like you're going to do a great presentation about security at the endpoint.
Or flying by autopilot. You got it,
Yeah.
Martin. Thanks so much for bringing me in here. I've had a very interesting path through Office 365 and through SharePoint. I started out doing a content management server 2001 with Microsoft when I became a Microsoft employee back in 2002, and that rapidly joined itself into SharePoint, which eventually joined itself into Office 365. And before it joined into 365, I joined the product group, and I was a SharePoint product manager for a couple of years, and had a great time. I got to know, in fact, that was where I got to know you, Martin, was when I was helping to develop the ISV ecosystem around SharePoint back in 2008, 2009, etc. Boy, that feels like 10 years ago now, doesn't it, Martin?
It's even more.
Anyway, I've had a great time with Office 365 and SharePoint. I've led local user groups. I've spoken in places around the world. One of my favorite, and I hate to bore the people on the meeting, but I'll tell you, one of my favorite was a 6-user group tour I did in New Zealand from the top by Auckland all the way down to Wellington, and it was just an amazing couple of weeks to tour user groups in New Zealand. Boy, that would have been in like 2012 or 13 or something. Anyway, I am really happy to be here. Today, my journey has brought me all the way to the EM&S world of Office 365. I'm going to call it Microsoft 365 one of these days. And I found how important it is for the business productivity world to be in line with the IT managers of the world, with the complete ecosystem of device creation or provisioning, management, and disposal, whether it's Apple or whether it's Windows devices or whether it's iOS or Android devices, having control over I'm going to turn off my video because I'm having some bandwidth issues here. Martin, sorry about that. So this is going to be but it's very important to have been provisioning devices all the way from the beginning to ensure that we have productive business productivity environments. And so maybe some of you have seen this slide before. I just want to set up the challenge here in a little bit, and that as business is changing, and I'm not just talking about the pandemic, but over the past few years, this transition has been turbulent for a lot of industries, and for some verticals, it's been more turbulent than others. You know, ever since, I won't date myself, but ever since a long time ago, we've seen some industries always be forward leaders and forward adopters of new technology, whereas we've seen other industries kind of be late and a little bit behind, let other people take the first steps. Well, we are smack dab in the middle, strong, top part of the curve around how should people be adopting the management of their devices. This is a proven technology. While there are new features that I'm going to talk about today, the approach to building on SCCM, to moving to Intune, and now moving to Endpoint Manager, these are all mature technologies for managing devices, and we're seeing the benefit of this maturity as we go forward. So, for example, let's look at we're going to talk a lot about the manual to automated today. We're also going to talk about the closed perimeter and cloud a little bit right now. The pandemic has totally illustrated, while I've been trying to remind companies that their data, as it moves to the cloud, is moving outside the data center. There's nothing that has been more clearly illustrated than the last couple of months, where even our employees have moved out of our walls, moved away from our firewalls, and our employees are taking their data with them on these devices. Well, we need to secure these devices, and that starts with how do we provision these devices. So not only do we have business influences that I just shown up there, but now we have IT approaches that are being modernized. So IT has been focused on, hey, you know what? It's centralized. Business owns your devices. You only have a single device, and we're going to push everything through that device. And IT is going to sit back, and when you call the help desk, they're going to react, right? They're going to be very reactive. But modern IT needs to be proactive, and modern IT understands that it's user devices and business-owned devices. It's not just business-owned devices anymore. And modern IT understands that users are going out and getting their own applications. But how the heck does IT manage all of that effort and manage all of those different realities in the modern IT world? Well, that's part of the challenge that we're being faced with today. And for any of you that have received a machine or have tried to re-image a machine or have tried to, how many of you remember the Pixie boots, where if you were lucky, you were able to connect to the network and hit some sort of F9 with a magic backslash with fingers twisted type of key, and all of a sudden it would reboot, and you would have this choice of operating systems. Well, these were images that IT department would craft lovingly over weeks and months and put everything in there and try and guess at what you needed. And they would say, we would have 2 images for our company. One of them would be for an IT person, and one of them would be for everybody else. And that would write to your machines, and that's how they would manage this stuff. Well, that doesn't work today. We not only do we have custom devices, but we have custom user profiles that need to be automated. So we need a different approach to how do we image devices. And so some of these tools on the left, I imagine that if you're in this session that you are familiar with that you have a pain, you have one of the pains that I've mentioned or one of the challenges that I've mentioned, and now I'm reopening the scab by showing you the names of these tools that you may have used, building custom corp images or using System Center Configuration Manager, SCCM, to push these things out. Let's just look at an example down there with the application stores. How hard was it for you to manage the different application stores, where if you had to push out enterprise applications and you had to use the Adobe store and you had to use the Microsoft store and you had to use the Apple store and you had to use all these different custom stores that maybe would let you publish variations of their applications onto it? And what if one of your IT guys built a cool little utility? Where would you put it? Would you have to build your own store? Well, now in today's world of Windows 10, all of these tools have been replaced. And if we take that example of the store, Azure includes a Microsoft store, and EMNS and Intune include a store where you can publish applications. And I'm going to show you how to publish an application today that's going to customize the interface for your PCs. And what I've learned over time using this is that it allows you to take advantage of that period of time when after somebody opens a machine, and while it's configuring with the network, and while it's downloading patches, and while it's doing that setup and waiting for everything, you have complete control over that device. And Microsoft has enabled you, using Autopilot, to install things and to leverage a Microsoft Store for Business to push out multiple apps, and they can be installed in the order that you need them. The dependencies can be reflected. And I'm going to show you how to take those things and relate them to specific users in your company or specific employee roles in your company based on what they need for their job and for the effort that they're going to need. And this is going to end up being the final solution for the new modern way of deploying devices in your organization. You're going to be able to manage them with some agents, but you're going to manage agentless as well. You're going to be able to have self-service deployment. Employees are going to be able to choose what they want to put on their machine. You're going to use Microsoft 365 right there at the top to manage all of this, whether it's the Office or the EMNS or the Windows 10 version. They all come together inside of these tools. This is the magic of Microsoft 365. And you're bringing in the proactive insights that come from the Microsoft Security Graph and come from Microsoft's cooperation in public forums and in worldwide networks. to bring these insights in, and from all of the Windows 10 devices that are distributed around the world. That intelligence feeds back into the process, making it better and better and better. All right, so what is Autopilot? It's not the guy who sits next to the pilot, or it's not the lever that you pull inside the cockpit that says, okay, let's just fly. We've got our Windows 10 product key. We've got our enterprise agreement set up with Microsoft. Let's just turn on Autopilot and everything will be there, right? But what it does do is it does reduce the flight time between ordering a machine and that employee getting operational and getting productive with that machine. And Autopilot in flight often maximizes the efficiency of a flight. And Autopilot inside of Microsoft with Windows 10 devices is going to do the same thing. And I'm going to show you how it's going to save. It's going to cut the corners just as far as it can, and it's going to save you time and effort and get your employees to be fully productive with their machines faster than ever. And you know what? A lot of that time is going to be saved in the IT department itself. So if we look at this diagram for a second, we see that the customer purchases a device, the customer is you in the IT shop, the device comes from the device vendor, it gets shipped over to the customer, and then the self-service experience for implementing makes it ready for business. Now that's all easy and straightforward. We see that process a lot. But what happens after that steady state usage is something happens and it breaks, or something happens and it needs to be sent back to the depot, or something happens and we need to reallocate that machine to another user perhaps, or maybe that user takes on another role and we decide that that machine is good enough to be optimized in a different way. So let's assign a different machine profile to that device. We can then trigger that machine to reset itself up again using Autopilot, using the new role, using the new machine configuration, using the new user profile to get it right back to ready for business. And often, if something is broken or fixed, this is often a very easy way to reset that machine back to the original state. However, let's look at that little van that is going in that fulfill and deliver. If we look at our IT departments yesterday, what happened during that period? The device would ship to our IT office. Our IT office would receive that device, would log it in, would open that device up, charge it up, apply an image to it, and sometimes that would take a couple hours, and then sometimes it would take 4 or 5 hours, maybe even more, of a technician to install software, to configure the desktop background, to make sure that the right browser version was installed, and to put all of the corporate requirements, the custom VPN or whatever is needed on there, on that device before the technician could box that machine back up, try and find the right power supply, try and find the right docking station for it, and then ship it to the employee. And if you say that that took less than a week, then you had a very good IT department. So that van in this little picture automatically saves a lot of time by not having that device go to your IT office and be cracked open and then be resealed and then be sent to the employee. And then if you take that and you optimize it by saying that, hey, during the break, fix, and reset time, we're going to save all that time again, or even more because the employee doesn't have to ship it anywhere, that's where Autopilot can really speed up your experience. At this point, I would like to remind you to put questions into the Q&A panel on this live event, because if there's any questions on there, that we'd be happy to address those. And I expect that, and Martin, if you think any need to be addressed immediately, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going and we'll address them at the end. Okay, so so we had the fancy picture about Autopilot. What does Windows Autopilot enable you to do? All right, well, let's say that your configuration is using only Windows Active Directory. Or let's say your configuration is using only Azure Active Directory. Or maybe you're some sort of connected Azure Active Directory with the Windows Active Directory. Or maybe you're even in a hybrid Azure AD. Now, you can be connected between those two without necessarily being a hybrid Azure AD. Those are different in scenarios altogether. But Autopilot works in those scenarios. It'll also work to auto-enroll those devices into different services. You can use it to restrict the administrator account. You can auto-assign the devices to different groups based on the device profile. So you order a device from your device vendor, it gets to the employee's home, home office, whatever, and maybe it's the same as what you ordered, or maybe it's not. You still might have to be flexible in your scripts in order to know what it is. Plus, you're not really building in Autopilot a profile for every discrete individual. You're building a profile that works for every collection, every role. You have the freedom to build one for every discrete individual. You certainly do, but that's not necessarily the most efficient. You might build a user profile, combine it with a device profile that works for lab technicians, or that works for field sellers, or that works for IT help desk people, or that works for contact center employees, for example. These are all, your executives might have a slightly different device profile or user profile. Every one of these can be configured, but you might have just 2 profiles for your company, or you might have 30. It doesn't matter. But when your employee does order the machine, you know what role they're in. The Active Directory knows what role they're in, and Active Directory can automatically determine, based on what groups they're in, which device profile should be assigned to that user. It may be that Autopilot takes over in doing that assignment because you're using dynamic groups, and that when a user, as a user's permissions or attributes changes, it automatically qualifies for different types of profiles based on its Active Directory group membership. Okay, so there's a couple of simple steps here for Autopilot. Device registration. So when we order a device, that vendor is going to send back to you enough information that you can uniquely identify that machine. Windows, the Microsoft Surface devices have been optimized for Windows Autopilot from the beginning, and they ship the hardware hash or the information that you need to configure to map that device to the right profiles directly with your purchase. But every one of your OEMs or distributors or resellers is able to provide that information to you. I work for a company called Zones. I'm the chief architect for Microsoft 365 at Zones, and that means that I spend a lot of time with customers and with our solution architects trying to design solutions for customers. And one of the solutions that we do a lot of is migrations, and we do a lot of device provisioning, and we resell every vendor's devices. And so we've gotten pretty good at figuring out, okay, which ones are good at giving us those devices, and which ones do we need to do a little bit of querying on, and how do we ask for those? But so from whatever reseller or distributor that you're buying your machines from, you can ask for that information. Now, your IT group goes into the Autopilot tool, the Azure Active Directory admin panel, and it creates the profiles, it makes the settings, it assigns the packages and the customizations that want to be installed, and then the vendor ships the device over to the customer, and then the user has one simple role, and that is to power on the device and connect it to the internet. And an Autopilot is pretty simple in that regard. Now I'm going to talk about 2 types of updates with Autopilot. Martin, is there anything I need to clear off at this point? We're doing good? All right. So there's 2 things that I'm going to talk about here. One of them is profile changes, and then another one is going to be, and this is for the user profile, the user setup, the user installation, and another one is going to be device profile changes here in a second. But first of all, if you look at all the things that you're familiar with an install and with a setup, these are all things that Autopilot can help you change. It can help you skip all of the Cortana, OneDrive, and OEM registration setup pages. You can automatically set up for a work or school. How many times do you want to query based on the user that it's set up for in the device? And I want to set this up to be, because I know that this is going to be set up as a classroom lab device for this lab, and you got 30 devices that are all going to be assigned to labs. Well, you've associated that profile because of your dynamic group membership, right, in AD. As soon as you turn on those machines, it knows that machine ID is locked into that lab, and it's configuring it for that lab profile that you've set up. It's the fastest way you've ever seen to provision machines like this. And you can eliminate everything that you don't want a user to sit there and have to click through while you're doing the setup. You can skip the privacy settings, you can disable local admin account creation on the device, you can skip the EULAs, you can turn off all the Windows consumer features. Now here's a couple of things. You can turn on BitLocker encryption immediately as part of this setup process. Now that is configurable, that takes your Windows 10 endpoint protection elements from your Azure Active Directory admin panel. Hey, if I can just bounce over into a quick demo real quick, I'm going to show you exactly where that is. So if I go into my Microsoft 365 Admin Center and I click here on Endpoint Manager, you see we have an Endpoint Manager Admin Center here, and I click on the Endpoint Manager Admin Center, I can get right into Devices, and I can get into Configuration Profiles. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we do with devices and everything, but these configuration profiles, these are the things that determine the variations that are going to be configured on your machine, right? And how your machine is going to be set different. And if you want to just create a new profile and you say, well, I'm going to do Windows 10 or later, look at the different platforms you can do. You're creating a profile here for mobile devices or for Mac OS or for different Windows versions. And so I'm going to choose Windows 10. What, you mean Windows 7 isn't on that list? You mean Windows 7 isn't supported even here either? Wow. All right, so Windows 10, if you're still on Windows 7, give me a call. Let's figure out how to get you off of that. All right, so Windows 10 and later is the platform here. And now I'm going to select a profile. And look, and a lot of these profiles are already set up here to be configured. It could not be any easier. But if you look at this endpoint protection one right here, now the endpoint protection, this is what's going to give you the, let's say that this is going to, we're going to endpoint config profile for classroom lab. And we'll click next on here. Now this is where we can say, hey, what are the things we're going to set up for this? And Windows encryption, this is where we can set BitLocker up. And now you've got that how are you going to encrypt? Are you going to encrypt your storage cards? Are you going to trigger a warning if other disk encryption is tried to be applied on top of that machine? You know, what configuration methods are you going to do? Are you part of a regulated environment that's going to need more, etc.? Do you need a second level of authentication at startup? This is not MFA. This is BitLocker authentication. You know, so there's, and then what else are you going to do to about your BitLocker settings? And this profile, you can set this settings up using your admin panel, and then I'll show you how it gets assigned to Autopilot later on in the session here. But now you're saying, what devices are we going to set it to? You know, I'm just going to set it to all devices right here, because in this demo tenant, I don't have a lot of devices created, so I don't have like, here's my classroom lab devices. But if I had the machines coming in from the vendors, I'd have the machines identified in groups. And so now it's going to all the devices, etc. You can say, you can decide where you're going to, if you're going to have any exceptions to where you're going to create it. And now you've got a configuration profile for BitLocker encryption. And then as time goes on, as devices get employed or get deployed with this profile on it, you're going to see this dashboard about that. If I go back to my list of configuration profiles, here's the config profile for the classroom lab. And when I build a machine profile for these machines, it'll have, you can associate multiples of these Windows profiles with it in order for Autopilot to deploy it. Now, one other element that's part of Autopilot is this DFCI management. If you have any questions about any of the things so far, please throw them in the question panel. But DFCI management is a very important part of Autopilot. This is the device firmware configuration interface. I had to put in parentheses there because I couldn't remember what DFCI meant. And I'm hoping maybe if it's on one of the Microsoft certification tests that this will help me remember what that name means. But the device firmware configuration interface is the one that lets you block users from modifying the BIOS settings. And so this is what allows you during the setup process to send Windows commands and PowerShell commands and modify the BIOS settings and lock out user changes where the user might want to change it later, where the user might want to say, hey, I'd like to do something else at boot. I'll maybe boot another OS, or maybe boot something else. You can block out, maybe put passwords on this and totally mess this up for anyone else. This is a way where you can block the users from being able to access BIOS settings. So this is a very useful piece inside of Autopilot as well. Another thing it lets you do is it lets you create this enrollment status page. If you've ever seen something that looks like this page, and it might be a little bit different because it might have different settings turned on or off, but if you see anything that looks like it's walking you through something, it could be that you're experiencing the Autopilot experience, and I'll tell you, it felt totally natural, didn't it? That's what your users are going to experience if you use Autopilot. It's a fine user experience. All right, so that's in the profile about what the user sees. Now, what is it that the user doesn't see, or what are the configuration changes that we can make once Windows is installed? You know, there's a lot of things Autopilot can do when Windows isn't installed, but now what can we do when Windows is installed? Well, we can configure the start menu layout. We can configure the desktop wallpaper. I don't need to read the whole thing here, but that is a good list of functionality that you may want to determine, that you may want to customize for your machines. Why would you not want to put your logo's background, your company's image on the desktop? And why would you not want to make sure that the right update patches and the current versions of OneDrive and Edge are there? You know, I mean, I tell you, this is all configurable with scripts. If you've used any of the PNP scripts for SharePoint configuration, and you've seen the site stuff that was the genesis for all the new stuff that Microsoft's been pushing out, you'll know that there's a place for you to put scripts and for you to put artifacts, and you can use that same kind of approach to connect inside of the Autopilot process. Well, let me tell you, there is a there's a great Autopilot aficionado, Mike Niehaus, and he has a GitHub, and I put his link up here. I'm going to show you this Autopilot branding tool that he's been using. And this guy is a genius when it comes to putting this tool together in terms of allowing you to customize the interface for Autopilot. And I would direct you to his website. I would direct you to his Twitter. I would direct you to his phone number, but I don't have his phone number. I would direct you to everything about this guy if you have any questions about Autopilot. In fact, I think I figured out how to do it as a demo. So instead of clicking through the slides, I'm going to actually brave it and do it as a demo. If you would prefer that I would just do the click through on the slides, please put that in the question panel right now. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and do it right here. Now look at this. I'm going to go to apps, and if I go to apps inside of my Endpoint Manager Admin Center, and I click into, so first of all, what can you do with apps? I'm not even going to talk to you today about conditional access or app protection policies. I'll tell you, that is the magic with with Microsoft 365 combined with EMNS. You have got to understand conditional access and application protection policies, and if you don't, then you should go out and do that right now. I am 100% certain that there are plenty of online sources for you to do that. Joanne Klein might actually have a couple for you to point you to. But inside of all apps right here, let's create a quick app. Now there's a bunch of apps in here that are already built. The only one I've added here is this one called Autopilot Branding. This is the one I'm going to add again. This is an out-of-the-box demo tenant. If you use a Microsoft demo tenant, it has all these apps in there that you can configure already that are ready to receive your configurations on different platforms. So if we go in and we add a new device, we have the flexibility here to put in a bunch of different types of applications. Maybe we're going to put a policy around a store app. Maybe you want to allow that Microsoft Store app for Netflix to be installed, but you want certain conditions and policies around it. Well, maybe you add that right here. 365 apps, And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a regular Windows Win32 app here at this point, and we'll create this app and we'll give it an app package file. So if you've built the app and you've already built the package file for this, then we're gonna go to, I guess I should learn how to type on this keyboard. My presentation keyboard, I only get it out, once every couple of weeks. And so sometimes the keys stick a little bit there, but here's the Autopilot branding package that I have here. And so I'm ready to install that, and we're going to put in a publisher name, and it's going to be Zones. I like that publisher. I like that publisher right there. I'm not going to put this in the company portal because this is not something that users are going to see once it's been deployed. This is something that users aren't going to see at all. This is going to apply a bunch of configuration changes to their setup when they load their machine for the first time. And you know what I'm going to do? I just realized I've got a lot more URLs to type in. So I'm going to go back and show you the one that I've already configured. So I'm going to go to apps, all apps, and I'm going to go back to this one I've already configured, and we're going to edit the property. We're going to edit the properties of this one. And so as I walk through, here's the walkthrough wizard. I've applied the thing in Zones, other apps. So there's information URL and privacy URL. These are going to point to information about your app, right? These are going to show up in your, if you had a store page that show up. This one I'm not really going to have a store page, and you can assign an image, a logo with the app. This makes sense if it's an app that employees are going to choose from, but still, you don't have to do it inside of this one where they're not going to be running it except for during the setup time. But you do need to put an install command and an uninstall command, because the install command is how Autopilot is going to execute it. And if something fails and it tries to roll back, it's going to try and use the uninstall command. And so you do want to, it's a normal app that you're putting in here with that aspect. And you do want to say, okay, it's going to be installed as a system level app. And the restart behavior, you might say, hey, it's always going to force a restart, or in this case, we're going to say, hey, based on return codes. And so if the return codes come back, these are normal return codes for determining what's going to happen to the machine after I finish this installation. All right, so what are the requirements? Well, maybe I'm going to require, you can choose the platform. Because I chose 32-bit app, these are really my only two options, but I'm going to choose them both because I'm not being particular around that, but I am being particular about the Windows 10 version. And I'm going to say, okay, great. I'm going to rely on that it has at least Windows 10 1903 in there. And if there's any other requirements that I have about this app, this is where some device profile settings might come into play. All right, and so now we're going to say, well, can I configure this? Is everything else there ready? Now I did some requirements, but maybe there's some dependencies that I need on this. Well, I'm going to configure some dependency rules on here. For example, I can't change this rule type, but I can create new ones here. I can show you this. So if I'm going to create a new dependency, I might have a different set of rule types based on has an MSI been installed in the system? Can I find that? Or can I find a file? Or are there registry settings that I can test for? And this can help me validate, are the right dependencies that I need in there? For example, you might require that the .NET, that the version 3.5 of .NET is installed if you're going to run certain types of things. Or you might have to have some version of a VR driver installed before you can configure this machine to support, the right VR headset that you're putting in or something like that. So if you choose file, looking for dependencies, you put in the path, put in the file. And what this one does is this one's telling me that I know I'm creating this file as part of this install. And so if the application has already been run, that file exists, then I don't need to run this application again. So I'll just bounce out if that file has already been run. And so then review, you're just looking at the settings here. So that's how you go through the process to install an application into your company store. And once you have that installed in your company store, Now you're going to associate that with a device profile, and that device profile is going to be associated with a group. So if we go into Windows now and we say we're going to create a, well, this is app still. I want to go into devices, I guess. And we go into devices, and now we're going to say, okay, what is the configuration profiles that we're going to create for this? I already showed you that, creating the one for the classroom lab. All right, let's go back to the slides here real quick. Now, once again, so if you download the slides, or if you see it on the video, you'll see my walkthrough. But if you prefer to have it without all of the talking, you can just grab it with the slides here, or you can go to this guy's GitHub site and you can find Michael Niehause's blog. And I'll tell you this, I can't stress more how you might find that the way he wrote about it is better than the way I described it, or if you found the way I described it better, then all right, read his blog anyway. But this is the way, this guy has so much about Autopilot, it's great. All right, so now we got to talk about, well, how do we get that Autopilot device into the system? And do we, excuse me just a second. I'm getting old. I need to do that a couple times during a presentation. All right, so can you manage the pulling of that information from those machines, which sounds a lot like the device came into my IT system and my IT office and somebody had to crack it open and look at something, or should I ask my OEM or reseller to do it? And so let me just cover a little bit more on what that hardware information looks like. It has to be enough that you can uniquely identify the machine. And so in this case, it's a hash that's created using the manufacturer's name, using the model name or number of the device, and the device serial number, and the hard drive serial number. And there's some other attributes, like something about the motherboard, right? And there's some other ones in there that, and it does have a timestamp type of information because the time you generated the hash is unique. All right, so every time you generate it, you're going to end up with a different hash. But that hash is going to be uniquely identify that machine, and that can then be separated from the machine. The hash can be emailed to you as an IT department, while the machine gets sent to the user. All right, so here's another slightly different variation of now that we understand the bits about Autopilot, I wanted to show a slightly different map of how this thing gets deployed so that I can talk about a couple of other features here. So your hardware vendor or your distributor or your reseller is uploading the device IDs. That can go into, they can upload it directly into Windows Autopilot for you. You can delegate permissions to your reseller or your OEM, and you can say, you don't have to delegate them permissions to anything but this, but then they can configure your Autopilot device profile or device list using those hashes. Now, you will then have to assign those device lists to device profiles, and you can do that by assigning to employees or groups or whatever, but they can add those devices into your device list. Another option is for existing devices, your IT admin can grab the hashes from those devices, create those hashes by collecting the right information, and then they can configure it yourself. And then when the employee gets the device, the device is going to query the Windows Autopilot system in the cloud and then pull down the right device profiles. Okay, so hopefully that makes a little bit more sense now about those device IDs have to go up there. They're matched with the account profiles and with the device profiles, and then it Autopilot smoothly delivers to your end users. Now, next week, perfect timing, but next week, Microsoft is doing an Ask Microsoft Anything. It's not an Ask Me Anything. No, this is an Ask Microsoft Anything. Slightly different, although it has the same abbreviation in AMA. And here's a couple of sample questions, but you don't have to register in advance. You can just show up, go to that URL at 12 noon US Eastern Time on June 3rd next week. And I promise you that Mike Niehaus guy, the Autopilot star, he's going to be there on that Ask Me Anything. Whoops. But I recommend you do that if you have more questions about Autopilot that we can't get answered in the last minute Q&A session. I would remind you that there are so many awesome security tools in Microsoft 365, and one of the best ways to ensure that your organization is going to be able to take advantage of the warm protection that these security tools provide is by having correctly configured and provisioned devices. And so if you have correctly configured and provisioned devices, I tell you, all of these little things, these are like quilts in the wintertime, man. These are going to keep you safe and secure. And I just put them here because we can never see these names enough, and because they always remind us how much more there is to learn and how much more we need to understand Microsoft 365. And I'll tell you, I am so happy to have been able to deliver this presentation to you. I really want to make a couple of thank yous here with the ending slides in the presentation, and then get it over to Q&A. But I'll just put this in front of you, that desperate times doesn't call for desperate measures. It calls for innovative measures. And I think that if you're not changing your organization with innovation, then you're waiting for someone else to do it to you. And so I would suggest that you get innovative about how you're making changes in these times. We've got the SharePoint conference coming up next year. Hope to see everybody there in person. Cannot wait to see everybody in person again. I'd like to say thanks to our sponsors. Tell you, and I'm going to come back to the sponsor slide rather than call them out right now. But if you haven't signed up for the raffle yet, please do. And you do that by going to the vendors booth here in the virtual conference. And then please donate. I tell you, we've got too many people doing too many good things, and they need our help. And here's a place to give some feedback. And then here's my thank you to you again. So Martin, thank you so much for producing this. And I'm sorry that we couldn't keep the video on all the time, but I am more than happy to have been here. Martin, are there any questions that we need to address?
Absolutely. We have a bunch of them.
Uh-oh. I hope I left enough time.
We do have enough time. So
all right.
We have 7 minutes according to the original planning. So
let's do it.
Let's do it. So let me read them out loud for you. The first one, is there a way to capture the telemetry in Autopilot, redeployment logs, app installs, if you're using...
100% there is. Yes. Logs are created on the devices, and those logs can be uploaded and can be sent, or they can be harvested after the fact. But you can send messages out too. So if you see, so you have, I mean, you're running applications inside of Windows 10 on there in an elevated permission. So there is, in fact, that Mike Niehaus's blog, he has articles about how to harvest those reports. So the answer is a big yes.
Clear.
Next one.
That's nice. So another one. From Rob, when is VPN available to connect to Azure Active Directory for domain join during Autopilot?
So
when is?
Were you going to clarify that?
Well, yeah, it has another quote like SSL VPN or F5 big IP as a specification.
A device. I'm going to get this wrong. So I'm not going to answer that and tell you exactly where it's going. I'd send you to Mike Niehaus's blog. So I'm sorry, I'm not going to answer that. I don't know. But I'll tell you, the joining to the Active Directory domain, and I studied up on this hybrid AD join. You do have, it does matter what way you join, what order you join these things in, because it's going to determine whether you're using an email address or whether you're using an organizational ID to sign in. And obviously you're going to get a Kerberos ticket if you're in an Active Directory domain, and you're going to get another ticket, a timeout ticket if you're in an Azure AD domain. So those are or token, I mean, not ticket. I'm going to stop there. I'm not going to go any farther than saying exactly where it happens. There's a handshake, though. They're not. Your system does not practice social distancing when it comes to TCP/IP packets. I'll tell you that.
Mm-hmm. So when a VPN is available to connect to AD for domain join during Autopilot, I think that's the same question, but yeah, that's the same question. I thought it might have more specification to it, but that one needs to be looked up. So next one then, can small MSPs utilize Autopilot, or are there special relationships with vendors required?
No, there's not a special relationship required. Small MSPs can certainly utilize Autopilot. I think that it's a good idea to utilize Autopilot, even if you're a small MSP. I think that the configuration changes you're probably going to want to make are still going to be better off. I mean, you'll have to measure how many machines are you going to configure versus the effort of automating that. But if it's, if it's more than 6 or 8, you certainly don't want to redo 6 or 8. So you might as well spend the time to automate them. And then if you're doing more than that, then it's a no-brainer.
Clear. So isn't dependency checks
and detection rules? Yeah, they can be, except that in this wizard, they were, some of them were like predefined in terms of I can check for these things right here, but then the other one I could have a little bit more open-ended interface, and I could add in some exceptions or add in some inclusion rules or that kind of stuff. So I guess you could say that they are, and I guess it just gives you 2 options in the wizard in order to separate them. But yeah, I mean, different dictionaries will say different things. They're close.
All right. The next one that I see is, how do we create Intune packages and put them into the app profile creation?
Perfect. So that GitHub that I mentioned in there for Mike Niehaus, that one has the instructions for and the source code for his. And there are docs, doc pages on docs.microsoft.com that also talk about how you need to create that.
All right. So I will try to, if you have a link, and maybe you can respond to that question with a link that might help. So there.
Well, I'll tell you, this is the link right here, and when you get the presentation, you'll have it. But this is the link right here. That's this guy's blog, wherever. Where is it? That far back. All right, GitHub.com, MT Niehaus Autopilot branding.
Perfect. All right. So then I think we have one more.
No, those are, Andrew was trying to help answer.
Yeah, I see. Yeah. Good. So I guess that was the last question, if I'm not mistaken. Double checking. But if that's yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, it makes me cringe when I hear anybody say, I'm going to give you back time. So I'm not going to say I'm giving, you guys use your own time. All right. I'm not giving anybody back any time. It's your own time. Use it how you want. But thank you so much for being here with us. And on behalf of the Virtual Marathon Conference, it's been a pleasure. And I look forward to seeing you all at the SharePoint Conference next year.